Always get the food. Thanks, Greg.
You got it.
This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. The political battle over the partial government shutdown has tonight devolved into a high-stakes game of constitutional one-upsmanship. One day after the Speaker of the House asked President Trump to postpone or cancel his State of the Union address, citing security concerns, the commander-in-chief today denied access to military aircraft for the Speaker and her colleagues to take a foreign trip. And he did it an hour before she was supposed to leave. All this happens against the backdrop of a shutdown now almost a month old. We have Vox team coverage tonight. Catherine Herridge tells us about comments from the president's lawyer causing quite a stir. But we begin with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts with quite a letter from the president today. Good evening, John.
It was quite a reaction, too, from the White House as well. White House officials tell Fox News that it has postponed for the time being, all government travel for so-called CODELs, congressional delegations. But the sudden postponement of Speaker Nancy Pelosi's congressional delegations raised a lot of questions as to whether it was prudence or payback. The congressional delegation, led by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was about to leave for Joint Base Andrews when President Trump informed the Speaker he was yanking the military aircraft she was supposed to fly on. In a letter, the president saying, "Due to the shutdown, I am sorry to inform you that your trip to Brussels, Egypt, and Afghanistan has been postponed. We will reschedule this 7-day excursion when the shutdown is over." The postponement of Pelosi's trip came.
White House correspondent John Roberts with quite a letter from the president today. Good evening, John.
It was quite a reaction, too, from the White House as well. White House officials tell Fox News that it has postponed for the time being, all government travel for so-called CODELs, congressional delegations. But the sudden postponement of Speaker Nancy Pelosi's congressional delegations raised a lot of questions as to whether it was prudence or payback. The congressional delegation, led by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was about to leave for Joint Base Andrews when President Trump informed the Speaker he was yanking the military aircraft she was supposed to fly on. In a letter, the president saying, "Due to the shutdown, I am sorry to inform you that your trip to Brussels, Egypt, and Afghanistan has been postponed. We will reschedule this 7-day excursion when the shutdown is over." The postponement of Pelosi's trip came after she sent President Trump a letter yesterday asking him to postpone the State of the Union address. In pulling the plug, President Trump called the trip a public relations event. Pelosi's spokesman said the CODEL was to express appreciation and thanks to our men and women in uniform for their service and dedication, and to obtain critical national security and intelligence briefings from those on the front lines. The White House insists it was not a tit-for-tat, that the president simply thought the nation would be better served by Pelosi staying home to negotiate with him to end the shutdown. Agreed, said the House Minority Leader.
Being Speaker of the House and leaving the country when it's shut down, I don't think that's appropriate, especially the Speaker thinks we shouldn't even have the State of the Union.
Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff was supposed to be on the trip.
Whether this kind of fifth grade conduct is going to contribute, it's hard to see how it's very constructive. But at the end of the day, whatever his motivation is, we're going to do our oversight.
Earlier today, Fox News asked Pelosi why she wasn't moving the ball forward.
Don't you, as Speaker of the House, have an obligation to be at the negotiating table?
We have gone to, what negotiating table are we not at? The last one we went to, I think, was a setup where the president pounded as he gave himself leverage to leave the room. But no, we're at the negotiating table.
The president fired back minutes later at the Pentagon.
While many Democrats in the House and Senate would like to make a deal, Speaker Pelosi will not let them negotiate. The party has been hijacked by the open borders fringe within the party.
Shame on them! Shame on them!
All of this happening at the same time furloughed federal workers spent their 27th day off the job, voicing their frustrations outside Washington Nationals ballpark, where Senate Republicans were holding a retreat. Senator Lindsey Graham, who does support the president's call for more border security, today condemned both sides in the postponement war, saying one sophomoric response does not deserve another. But as day 27 in this partial shutdown begins to draw to a close, no sign that the two sides are country any closer to even getting together to try to negotiate an end to it. Brett?
Amazing. More on this with the panel. John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. The State Department is instructing all U.S. diplomats in Washington and elsewhere to return to work next week with pay. It says it has found money for their salaries, at least temporarily. The department says it can pay most of its employees beginning Sunday or Monday for their next pay period. It's unclear if the State Department will be able to continue to pay employees after the 15-day period. They will not be paid for time worked since the shutdown began in December until the situation is resolved. The president's top lawyer, meantime, is trying to walk back a claim that has raised eyebrows and dropped jaws after an interview last night. Rudy Giuliani said in a TV interview that neither he nor President Trump ever claimed that there was no collusion with Russia on the part of his campaign, appearing to lay the groundwork for the possibility someone in the campaign, not the president, did collude with the Russians. Giuliani tried to clarify that today. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has the details. Good evening, Catherine.
Thank you, Brett, and good evening. Giuliani's comments got so much attention because they seem to draw a distinction between the president's actions and those of his election team.
I never said there was no collusion between the campaign or between people in the campaign.
Yes,
I have no idea if I have not. I said the President of the United States. There is not a single bit of evidence the President of the United States committed the only crime you could commit here, conspired with the Russians to hack the DNC.
Though Rudy Giuliani has made similar statements in the past, the media and president's critics seized on the comments.
I know Mr. Trump could be probably a tough client, but if I'd been the client, I would have been pretty upset with Mr. Giuliani's comments.
The ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee went as far as suggesting Giuliani's comments laid the groundwork for tough findings from the anticipated final special counsel report.
There may be the case that Mr. Giuliani knows more than any of the rest of us at this point in terms of what may be coming in future days and weeks.
Giuliani issued a clarifying statement telling reporters, quote, "There was no collusion by President Trump in any way, shape or form. Likewise, I have no knowledge of any collusion by any of the thousands of people who worked on the campaign."
I do.
During confirmation hearings this week, William Barr, the president's nominee to lead the Justice Department, said there is nothing in the regulations that dictate the final special counsel report is public or sent to Congress, though Barr offered assurances.
But my purpose is to get as much accurate information out as I can.
I'm asking you to commit that you will explain to us information that you have taken out of that special counsel report.
You would not like it if I made some pledge to the president that I was going to exercise my responsibilities in a particular way, and I'm not going to make a pledge to anyone on this committee.
The president's former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, who soon heads to jail, admitted today to reporting by the Wall Street Journal that in 2015, before Donald Trump was the Republican nominee, Cohen hired a tech firm to boost Trump's poll numbers. "What I did was at the direction of and for the sole benefit of at real Donald Trump at POTUS. I truly regret my blind loyalty to a man who doesn't deserve it." Giuliani responded saying Cohen had no authority to act on behalf of the campaign and President Trump knew nothing about it. And with allegations he stole more than $30,000 from his old boss, Giuliani said Cohen could now add petty criminal to his long list of derogatory labels. Brett.
Captain, thank you.
You're welcome.
Government investigators say many more migrant children may have been separated from their parents than the Trump administration has acknowledged. A report from the Health and Human Services Inspector General's office finds family separations were taking place before the spring of last year, when the administration announced its zero-tolerance policy on the southern border. The administration has identified a little more than 2,700 children as part of a court case in which a federal judge ordered families reunited. Investigators concluded that the true number of migrant children separated from their parents is unknown and could be much higher. President Trump wants to put a new layer of sensors in space to help the U.S. detect and destroy any missiles launched against it. It's part of a new effort to strengthen America's defenses against the world's deadliest weapons. That sounds a bit like an old effort from the 80s. Lucas Tomlinson has specifics tonight from the Pentagon.
President Trump announcing a new missile defense plan earlier today to a packed Pentagon auditorium, the first in 9 years. It calls for adding space-based missile defense technology to keep pace with growing threats.
We are committed to establishing a missile defense program that can shield every city in the United States and we will never negotiate away our right to do this.
The president warned the missile threat is increasing.
They're increasing their lethal strike capabilities, and they're focused on developing long-range missiles that could reach targets within the United States.
President Trump did not mention Russia, China, or North Korea by name, but his new acting defense secretary did.
North Korea's missiles remain a significant concern. America's competitors, including China and Russia, are increasing their existing missile system capabilities, adding new and sophisticated missiles to their arsenals.
Unlike ballistic missiles, which follow a standard trajectory, the Pentagon is concerned about new hypersonic missiles that Russia and China are developing. They can travel 20 times the speed of sound and move around in space, making them much harder to detect and destroy. The U.S. is also developing hypersonic missiles. A 108-page report released by the Pentagon recommends adding 20 new ground-based interceptors in Alaska, space-based sensors, a new interceptor site in the continental United States, to guard against the potential expansion of missile threats, including a future Iranian intercontinental ballistic missile. Experts say the new missile defense plan is on a scale not seen since President Reagan's Star Wars. Already, the Russian government has weighed in, saying the new strategy will increase global tensions. Brett?
Lucas Thomason at the Pentagon. Lucas, thanks. What do you think the U.S. should do to defend against enemy missiles? Let me know on Twitter at Brett Baier. Use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BrettBaierSR. Vice President Pence is assuring the leader of Venezuela's legislature the U.S. has his back. It's the latest move in the effort to get rid of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who is beginning a second term that the U.S. and many other nations consider illegitimate. State Department correspondent Rich Edson fills us in tonight.
A serious internal challenge to President Nicolas Maduro's control of Venezuela. The opposition-controlled National Assembly declared Maduro stole power and that the Venezuelan Constitution allows for a transitional government to replace him.
May God bless Venezuela and our congressmen who gallantly assume a historical responsibility in our country.
And that may be the man to replace him. Juan Guaido, a 35-year-old industrial engineer, the president of the National Assembly, and he has strong overseas support.
I spoke with Juan Guaido just yesterday. I told him the United States will continue to stand strong with the people of Venezuela until democracy and liberty are restored.
The State Department says it supports Guaido and that it's time to begin the orderly transition to a new government. Some in Congress want the United States to move further and fully recognize Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate leader. Earlier this month, Maduro was sworn in for a second term, the result of an election many within Venezuela and the international community say was a sham. Maduro refuses to relinquish his authority.
To those who want to make fun of the Constitution, calm down, everyone. Let them play their game of mockery, because there is justice here and there is law.
Maduro still has some international support among U.S. adversaries. Venezuela is in economic crisis, and China and Russia have invested in and lent it billions. Last month, Venezuela announced $6 billion in Russian investments in oil and gold mining.
The approach of undermining governments the United States doesn't like is a priority of their activity in Latin America and in other regions.
The United Nations says more than 3 million Venezuelans have fled their country to escape hyperinflation, food and medicine shortages, and violence. More than 1 million of them have gone to neighboring Colombia. Brett?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Rich, thanks. Democrats seeking to replace this government's leader are making some big moves of their own. Many of the 2020 presidential contenders on the Democratic side are taking their once moderate political positions and veering to the left pretty hard. Correspondent Peter Ducey tells us why tonight.
Democrats who aren't yet darlings of their party's progressive wing get a do-over.
I'm running for president of the United States.
She's also unknown by more than half of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents polled by Marist. So Kirsten Gillibrand is one of the 2020 contenders reshaping more moderate moments from her past, like saying sorry for being so strongly against illegal immigration.
I was callous to the suffering of families who want to be with their loved ones, people who want to be reunited with their families.
Also apologizing, Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard for previously speaking out against gay marriage.
I regret the role that I played in causing such pain, and I remain committed to fighting for LGBT equality.
Congressman Beto O'Rourke, whose views as a Senate candidate were relatively moderate for a Democrat, is now wondering aloud if America might want to abandon the U.S. Constitution. Quoted by the Washington Post as saying, "Can an empire like ours, with military presence in over 170 countries around the globe, with trading relationships and security agreements in every continent, can it still be managed by the same principles that were set down 230-plus years ago?" Today, progressives are pressuring California Senator Kamala Harris for not being progressive enough as a prosecutor. An op-ed published in the New York Times today explains the state's top prosecutor has the power and the imperative to seek justice in cases of tainted convictions. That means conceding error and overturning them. Rather than fulfilling that obligation, Ms. Harris turned legal technicalities into weapons so she could cement injustices. Earlier this week, Harris tried to leverage skills learned as a prosecutor while interrogating William Barr about the Mueller probe.
Under what scenario would you not follow their recommendation?
If I disagreed with it.
The Trump re-election platform isn't expected to be that much different than what won for him in 2020. But when it comes to challengers in the 2020 field that is forming, Democrats are looking at other candidates and at themselves and trying to stand out by stepping to the left. Brett?
Peter Ducey up on the Hill. Peter, thanks. Up next, why a professional basketball star in America is considered an enemy of the state in one country. We'll explain. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Los Angeles says talks resume between striking teachers and the LA Unified School District. This is the fourth day of the teachers' strike there. They're demanding higher pay and smaller classes. The district says there's not enough money. Fox 32 in Chicago has 3 Chicago police officers accused of trying to cover up the 2014 shooting of a black teenager to protect another officer who pulled the trigger are found not guilty today. The officer who shot Laquan McDonald 16 times, Jason Van Dyke, was convicted of second-degree murder in October and will be sentenced tomorrow. And this is a live look at New York from Fox 5, our affiliate there. The big story there tonight, a reprieve for Sears. The company's chairman and largest stockholder has reportedly won a bankruptcy auction. Eddie Lampert was the only one to put forth a proposal to rescue the floundering company in its entirety. He had sweetened his bid multiple times to more than $5 billion. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
To be nobody but your...
This is a Fox News alert. Just moments ago, the White House announcing that its delegation that was set to be led by Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will no longer attend the World Economic Summit in Davos, Switzerland, saying out of a consideration for the 800,000 great American workers not receiving pay and to ensure his team can assist as needed, President Trump has canceled his delegation's trip to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. That's from Sarah Sanders just a few moments ago. This, of course, after the president canceled the military aircraft for the Speaker of the House and Democratic Congress and lawmakers to head overseas to a number of different stops. Facebook says it has removed hundreds of Russia-linked pages, groups, and accounts. It says we're part of 2 big disinformation operations targeting users outside the U.S. The social media company says its latest effort to fight misinformation came after it found 2 networks, quote, that engaged in coordinated, inauthentic behavior on Facebook and its Instagram service. When the New York Knicks lost to the Washington Wizards this afternoon in London, one of their top players was missing. That's because he says he's afraid for his life and is wanted in his home country on a terrorism charge. Tonight, senior correspondent Rick Leventhal tells us how a basketball star in America has become an enemy of the state in Turkey.
What I'm doing is way bigger than basketball.
Enes Kanter is a nearly 7-foot-tall center for the New York Knicks, who says the only thing he terrorizes is the rim. But Turkish President Recep Erdogan says Kanter is an enemy of the state, issuing an arrest warrant and seeking extradition of the Turkish national because of his ongoing outspoken criticism of Erdogan's rule.
Whoever talks about the government, President Erdogan thinks those guys are terrorists. So that shows that there is no freedom of speech in Turkey. So that's why I was trying to be the voice of all those innocent people.
Kanter says he had to skip his team's trip to London this week for a game against the Washington Wizards, fearing he could be killed or kidnapped there by Erdogan loyalists. Cantor and his family have been longtime followers of exiled Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen, who now lives in Pennsylvania. Gulen is accused by the Turks of orchestrating a failed coup attempt in July 2016, when hundreds were killed, including dozens of police. And afterward, tens of thousands of Gulen supporters were arrested, including Cantor's own father, who's facing years in Turkish prison. Cantor regularly blasts Erdogan on Twitter, calling him the Hitler of our century, and says there isn't a single piece of evidence of my wrongdoing. I don't even have a parking ticket in the U.S. Cantor spent Tuesday on Capitol Hill meeting with lawmakers, including Marco Rubio, to call attention to the plight of Erdogan's opponents.
It's a very dangerous situation, and the best thing we can do from our perspective is to continue to shine light on it and call attention to it.
Cantor says he can't walk the streets of New York alone anymore, but he won't stop speaking out to try and force positive change in his homeland. Brett?
Rick Leventhal in New York. Rick, thanks. Up next, why there is new optimism about another summit between President Trump and Korean leader Kim Jong-un. First, beyond our borders tonight, the head of the United Nations mission in Yemen is safe following a reported shooting incident. The retired Dutch general and his staff are monitoring a ceasefire and withdrawal of rival forces from a key port city in Yemen. Striking school teachers and other Greek civil servants shut down central Athens for hours today. They are protesting new hiring criteria for teachers being considered by lawmakers. About 3,000 people took part in the protest outside the Parliament building, disrupting public transportation for about 5 hours in Athens while police diverted traffic away from that area. British Prime Minister Theresa May will not attend the World Economic Forum in Switzerland next week. We told you earlier that the White House delegation was no longer going. Well, May's office says she's skipping the event because she is focused on domestic matters. Yesterday, May survived a no-confidence vote one day after her Brexit plan was rejected by lawmakers there. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
Hear it in the background. She's watching it too, saying, and this is where.
There are indications tonight that a second summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un may be on the horizon, and soon. We could know more tomorrow after a White House meeting involving a key North Korean envoy. Here's senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott.
Guess who's coming to Washington again? Reportedly, right-hand man to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Kim Yong-chol, traveling from Pyongyang via Beijing. When he was at the White House last year, he brought a message from Chairman Kim to President Trump, paving the way for the Singapore summit. U.S. officials say he is bringing another message to the president and could confirm another meeting.
He seems to be in the driver's seat in many regards when it comes to figuring out when these high-level meetings are going to happen.
Vietnam is reportedly a possible location for the meeting. It hosted a 2017 summit of regional leaders, has diplomatic ties with North Korea and the U.S., and could show how former foes could become friends. There has been less friendly talk between North Korea and the U.S. lately. While reconfirming their commitment to denuclearization, the regime has been making more demands of the U.S. And while President Trump says relations are good, his administration admits few gains.
While the president has started a promising dialogue with Chairman Kim, we still await concrete steps by North Korea to dismantle the nuclear weapons that threaten our people and our allies in the region.
Secretary of State Pompeo is also set to meet Kim Yong-chol. Their last meeting was canceled by North Korea. Other mid-level meetings are ramping up in advance of a possible summit. Some warn, though, that should be handled with care.
We have really serious questions about whether or not a second summit is going to deliver the results that we want.
An announcement of the possible new Trump-Kim summit could come as early as tomorrow. Still, it's expected the meeting won't happen for a few months. Time enough, maybe, to smooth out some diplomatic bumps. Brett.
Greg Palcott in London. Greg, thanks. It was another good day for Wall Street here in the U.S. The Dow gained 163. The S&P 500 finished ahead 20. The Nasdaq was up 50. The trade tensions between the U.S. and China may be about to ease a bit. Perhaps that affected the market. Talks are scheduled later this month following negotiations in Beijing. Susan Lee of the Fox Business Network joins us from New York with details. Good evening, Susan.
Good evening, Brett. Closer, but nowhere near completion on a U.S.-China trade deal. Both the White House and the U.S. Treasury refuting reports this afternoon that said that the U.S. was weighing the lifting of some trade tariffs on Chinese goods, with the administration saying no new tariff decisions have been made. They did confirm that trade talks were moving to higher levels at the end of this month in Washington, D.C., with the two main players, Robert Lighthizer for the U.S. and China's Vice Premier Liu He, talking face-to-face. Economists say that's encouraging, with enough agreement between the two sides to move discussions to the next level. One complication, though, might be China's Huawei. The world's second-largest smartphone shipper might be facing criminal charges in the U.S. of illegally stealing trade secrets, stemming from civil cases, including one that alleged a Huawei employee physically stole parts off a robotic testing device from T-Mobile and took pictures without permission.
We doubt the true intentions behind this. It's not only inconsistent with the rules of free and fair competition, but also against the spirit of the rule of law if they expand and politicize civil cases at every turn and arbitrarily use state apparatus to suppress Chinese enterprises.
We were unable to confirm with our sources inside the Justice Department of any pending criminal investigations against Huawei. But according to reports, Germany is the latest country to rethink its relationship with the company, joining the U.S., UK, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand in either blocking Huawei or reviewing access. Brett?
Susan, thank you. Well, it is getting really nasty between President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi over the partial government shutdown. The latest moves, the reaction in Washington, and what comes next. We'll get reaction from the panel when we come back.
I think everybody knows what the State of the Union is. It's screwed up right now.
Have you heard? No, we haven't heard yet. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But we haven't heard. It's very silent, more than 24 hours.
Fox News alert President Trump denying a military jet for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Nobody has told them yet that they have to get off the bus.
It is unbecoming a president of the United States, but it is, unfortunately, a daily occurrence.
I'm just shocked she'd even think that she would leave the country. Why would you leave the country with government shut down and you're Speaker of the House?
We believe this is completely inappropriate by the president. We're not going to allow the president of the United States to tell the Congress it can't fulfill its oversight responsibilities.
Well, this is quite a day after the Speaker of the House said, you know what, you shouldn't do the State of the Union address, security concerns. Today, she and some other lawmakers were heading overseas on what's called a congressional delegation, a CODEL, and then just before they left, this letter came out from the president. Due to the shutdown, I am sorry to inform you that your trip to Brussels, Egypt, and Afghanistan has been postponed. We will reschedule the 7-day excursion when the shutdown is over. In light of the 800,000 great American workers not receiving pay, I'm sure you would agree that postponing this public relations event is totally appropriate. I also feel that during this period it would be better if you were in Washington negotiating with me and joining the strong border security movement to end the shutdown. Obviously, if you'd like to make your journey by flying commercial, that would certainly be your prerogative. Our friend and frequent panelist Amy Walter tweeted out at that point today, we are now in what historians would call the nana poo-poo era of American politics. There's where we are. Let's bring in our panelists. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for The Washington Times. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of The Washington Free Beacon. Charlie.
I was really waiting to see how you were going to pronounce the na-na, ha-ha, poo-poo thing. Look, you know, Washington has been dysfunctional for a long time, and I think that today, the last couple of days, has been sort of a very outward expression of that. And for a lot of people, I think it's kind of a relief. It's like, okay, let's have it all. Let's have the fight all out in the open. The problem here, and I think Donald Trump in that letter and Kevin McCarthy restated this as well, make a very good point. If the government is shut down, and this is, and at least maybe they believe that the crisis on the border is manufactured, but the crisis here is not manufactured. Why aren't you here negotiating? And at the end of the day, the big question remains: what are the principles that the two sides stand for? We know what the principle that Donald Trump is standing for right now, which has to do with border security, building the wall, whatever you think of that. What are the principles that Nancy Pelosi stands for and Democrats stand for? They want to save money? Well, they don't have a very good track record of that. They want an efficient, they want a more efficient way of dealing with the border. They don't have a very good track record at dealing with the border. So I think that the political fight here, at the end of the day, is beneficial to President Trump.
AB, Democrats pushed back immediately, saying, well, the delegation is going to Davos from the administration. During the show, they just canceled that. The president saying that he'd like everybody to stick around and not go to Davos. Obviously, CODELs are important for lawmakers to get a sense of things on the ground, talk to NATO officials in Brussels, talk to military leaders in Afghanistan. But to Charlie's point, what about not negotiating and the speaker being out of town for however long she'd been out of town?
Well, I cannot imagine what it's like. There are millions of people suffering. It's not 800,000 workers. There's a huge ripple effect, and the president's being informed about the economic damage that the shutdown is doing that he owned on December 11th that the polls show Americans blame him for. People are really, really hurting. So to watch cable news today, if you're one of those people, I cannot imagine what it's like to watch the funny, sick burn coverage of this political smackdown. I actually agree with the outcome. I don't think there should be a State of the Union address while the government shut down. And I think that the CODEL is not an emergency and it can be postponed. I think the NATO commanders need a little assurance right now. They're afraid that the U.S. president is going to pull out of NATO. But I don't think it's right to expend any non-emergency resources whatsoever with all of these things that can be postponed. And so I just think it's better that both things were canceled.
Senator Lindsey Graham, he's been active in a lot of these different parts of the shutdown and everything else, tweeted out, one sophomoric response does not deserve another. Speaker Pelosi's threat to cancel the State of the Union is very irresponsible and blatantly political. President Trump denying Speaker Pelosi military travel to visit our troops in Afghanistan, our allies in Egypt and NATO is also inappropriate. Matthew.
Well, on one level, it's not surprising. I mean, was the one quality that is always attributed to President Trump? It's the fact that he's a counterpuncher. So what did Nancy Pelosi expect when she ostentatiously said we can't have the State of the Union this year because of security reasons, which I'm sure they were going to be able to find workarounds? So instead of saying, well, I'm going to hold the speech anyway, or I'm going to give the speech in a different location and send you the text, which he may still decide to do, President Trump has retaliated, as he usually does. And I think this dynamic illustrates why we're no closer to reaching a compromise than we were last month, which is that both sides are now firmly entrenched and they're playing to their base. And when you have 80% of Democrats telling Nancy Pelosi, don't give him any money for the wall, and you have 79% of Republicans telling President Trump, we need that wall or else, how are you going to reach a solution?
You know, AB, there's a lot of focus and coverage on Republicans, breaking ranks and saying we need to open this now and negotiate the border later. What about on the Democratic side? Or is there a feeling that there's a breaking of ranks? And, I talked to Steny Hoyer last night. He said there's a compromise possible, walls work sometimes.
No, I saw what he said, and he made the point that the State of the Union offer had not been rescinded or rejected. It's that it's been postponed. On this impasse, the Democrats are aware of these two political traps. One is that President Trump intends to swamp all of 2019 and all of their message bill moments and everything they want to do on voting right protections and gerrymandering restrictions and transparency, this and that, everything they wanted to do on the House floor, Medicare for all, that he intends to swamp by flooding the zone no matter what, and that they are going to be blamed. All these freshman Democrats who won Republican seats, whether they were Trump seats from 2016 or Clinton seats, are going to be blamed by their constituents soon for coming to Washington and voting no and not helping reopen the government. That said, they also realize that this is a tactic by Donald